Last week, this channel put out a leak that involved not just the release dates of Zen 5 and Zen 6 architectures, but also details about new higher core count options for Zen 6 products and early IPC targets for both generations. Now that last thing, the IPC, yeah, that's what most people were talking about after that video came out, which isn't unexpected. Although, I do have to admit, a lot of the conversations seem to be arguing that AMD's upcoming architectures looked fairly weak compared to the rumors currently circulating about Arrow Lake and other upcoming Intel architectures. And after seeing this, I decided to really set out this week and drill in on exactly what Intel has coming over the next few years, give a big update of the upcoming architectures over what I put out months ago, and decide if I agree, if I feel that AMD really could be in trouble. Although before I do that, I do need to remind all of you watching, if you did not pay attention to that last video, and many people in forums seem to have failed to, that a key aspect of that video was highlighting that those Zen 5 and Zen 6 IPC numbers were minimum targets that AMD's core design teams were confident they could at least hit. You see, early targets, even some communicated to the press by AMD, often end up below what's claimable by marketing. You see, when a product actually finally comes out and the average is put together and it's not a perfect science, the IPC that AMD's team achieves, that AMD can claim they achieved, is almost always above what early performance targets end up being, and so they really didn't bother me. I still expect Zen 5 to achieve a claimable IPC increase that's at least 15% or maybe around 20% or higher, and therefore get to an overall performance uplift comparable to what Zen 3 achieved over Zen 2, but possibly with even better efficiency gains than what was achieved back then. And frankly, if you've been following this channel for the past year, those numbers aren't shocking at all. They line up with leaks put out half a year ago and are backed up by leaked Cinebench scores of Zen 5 CPUs from months ago. The fact is that Zen 5 looks like a solid uplift yet again that's launching on time ahead of the competition's Arrow Lake generation, and then Zen 6 looks to bring massive latency improvements with a new chiplet design that I think will be very impressive as well. And remember, that new chiplet design with Zen 6, I do need to highlight this because I think a lot of people either misquoted or overlooked it. I think I do need to highlight that compared to what Intel is bringing to the table, Zen 5 can, if AMD chooses to launch them, have both 4nm 8-core and 3nm 16-core options in a single AM5 package in early 2024, less than half a year from now. And then, about a year and a half later, I think they can then choose to use 32-core 2nm CCDs for some Zen 6 offerings. Now, I can't promise you they will use them immediately or even for consumers ever. After all, AMD has chosen to not launch a 24-core Zen 4 model with the Ryzen 7000 series, even though I know they could if they wanted to, but I do feel like that potential for an 8-core X3D plus 16C core Zen 5 product, and then potentially backing that up with a successor that is 48 cores total with Zen 6 in 2025, that potential is something a lot of people are overlooking when they assume that AMD's doomed. Well, it's up to AMD if they launch those products. I think they probably would if they felt threatened, and the only reason they haven't launched a 24-core Zen 4 model is they just don't think it's worth bothering to do before Zen 5 comes out. But anyways, what am I saying all of this for? It's time to show you. I want to leak a lot of new details about Arrow Lake Refresh, Lunar Lake, Panther Lake, and I think exclusively for the first time, the core counts of Nova Lake. And keep all of those AMD things in the backyard while I show you those. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Well, it's that time of year again, the time of costumes, family, friends, and of course also eating lots of unhealthy candy and food. It's also simultaneously usually when most people are crunching to finish up the work they need to for the year before the holidays, and while you're crunching, that usually means you're also likely to eat other unhealthy foods in between those bouts of eating unhealthy food with family and friends. Well, that's of course unless you eat Vite Ramen. This piece of content is sponsored by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers tons of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, including new flavors like Radiant Crab Roux, and also their Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break that's sometimes away from home. Or they also have other healthy products like their Nano Boost powder that makes any food at least a little healthy. Click on the link in the description and use the offer code BROKENSILICON to get 10% off a variety of products from Bite Ramen, like special bundles for Moore's Law's Dead fans, raw nudes if you want to make up your own recipes with their noodles, and other food products, powders, and utensils, and more. They really are a plucky small startup that has been really good to Moore's Law is Dead for years now, and I also genuinely like their product. So if you want to support Moore's Law is Dead, try Vite Ramen, and just clicking on that link in the description really helps a ton, but buying their product and using the offer code BROKENSILICON, of course, helps the channel even more. Try Vite Ramen today. Now, before I get to the new Intel info, please keep this AMD stuff in the back of your head. The minimum IPC increases they're looking to achieve, before we even talk about if they will and they hope to achieve higher than that, and before we talk about the other gains in performance they can get through higher clock speeds, the cache improvements that Zen 6 will bring, and the fact that both Zen 5 and Zen 6 can up core counts quite a bit on desktop over what they currently offer, and of course that they will be upping core count massively in server, whether or not they do on desktop. Keep all of that, all of AMD's potential, all of their options, all the levers they can pull in the back of your mind as we go through the new Intel info. But of course, as always, I like to start with some disclaimers. Now, it's recommended that viewers of this video watch the Intel Arrow Lake and Diamond Rapids Evolve hyperthreading video first to understand what this video is adding on to. And then also, please remember that major changes can happen to products, maybe not months before they come out, but definitely years before they come out. For example, there were plans for 6+16 Meteor Lake products. We even have pictures of socketed Meteor Lake, but it's not coming out. And as you're about to see, Panther Lake scope has been basically entirely redefined from what Intel was planning just a couple of years ago. All right, let's start, of course, first with Arrow Lake, which it does sound like is going to be a late 2024 launch, and it's going to be made on Intel 20A, which I am told that option was added late in development once they realized Intel's foundries were back on track. It is predominantly designed for TSMC N3B, and I do have a couple sources insisting it's B. Not every source has heard this, but none of them have heard the contrary, and it seems like what Intel's planning to do is reserve this base TSMC 3 nanometer node so they can have massive capacity, but then also because they've basically been designing Arrow Lake towards this node for a while now, and they don't want to switch it over. That's what it sounds like to me. And it goes up to 8 big cores, 16 little cores, and 2 low-power E-cores, with, of course, the Lion Cove and Skymont architectures. And yeah, so that sounds really impressive now, doesn't it? But then note, it lacks rentable units, which is the holy grail of Jim Keller's Royal Core architecture coming out in years from now, and it also lacks hyperthreading. But Arrow Lake should beat Raptor Lake by at least 25% in single threading, and I'm saying that with high confidence, at least a 25% single threading increase, but no source thinks it will achieve above 40%. I continue to, as I've been saying for a long time, think that Arrow Lake, based on projections, based on early benchmarks of low boosting silicon, be under the impression that Arrow Lake's going to bring around 30% single threading uplift over Raptor Lake. But I could see a worst case scenario where it's only 25%, but it could get up to 40% as well. Now, the multi-threading increase is harder for me to double down on, and I'm going to explain why here. In workloads that utilize less than 8 or up to 8 P-cores, it's possible for Arrow Lake to offer a larger 8-thread performance increase. So that's just 8 threads being used. That is technically multi-threading. Then it's 1-thread performance increase for similar reasons to why Zen 4 brought like up to I don't know what it was, like 40 or 50% multi-threading increase, despite the single threading increase just being 29%. That's because the all-core boost clock is higher on average of an increase than just the single core is itself, right? So think of it this way. Let's say hypothetically that Arrow Lake ends up getting a 25% IPC increase over Raptor Lake for the P-cores, but then it also achieves a 5% clock speed bump. Let's say it can hit like 6.4, 6.5 gigahertz. If that happens, in that scenario, you're looking at a situation where you have like an over 30% single threading increase. Right, but what if when you're using 8 of those P cores. All of them are now boosting, on average, far more than 5% higher than 8 P cores being used at once with Raptor Lake, where they use a boatload of energy and then throttle, right? So that's where this is all coming from. And yet, simultaneously, I don't think that means, though, right, that you might see the all-thread, so 24-thread, 8 P cores and 16 E-core performance increase by as much. Because when AMD raises all-core boost clocks by, say, 20% with a 14% IPC increase, they get a massive all-thread gain. But Intel only has 8 P cores. So if the little cores are only, say, 20 to 30% better, but then their P cores are 30 to 40% better, that means that the all-thread workload isn't going to be quite as high as what AMD would get by boosting all P cores. Because AMD uses all P cores, Intel does not. And that's why I want to make this clear here. I'm not being flaky about the multi-threading increase. I think it will be at least 20%, and I could see a little above 40%. But it doesn't sound like that's where it's going to excel the most. Arrow Lake should dominate best in mixed workloads. That means in workloads where you're not using all cores, but you're using like up to like half of them, with some E cores being used and 8 threads being used on the P cores. And then I'll also be good at single threading and also offer decent multi-threading performance. I hope that makes sense. Now, it is also starting to sound, though, like Arrow Lake Desktop could be slipping to very late 2024. That's why I say Q4 2024 there. And I honestly think there's a chance it could launch in November or even December. And now the mobility models of Arrow Lake sound like they might not launch until early 2025. So think about those Zen 5 release dates and then look at Arrow Lake, which lacks hyperthreading. I don't think AMD's completely screwed next year. In fact, I think they may be in the stronger position. Now, I really think the way I would summarize this situation is it really feels like Zen 3 versus Alder Lake all over again to me, right? Zen 3 launched around a year before Alder Lake, took all performance crowns, and then swept the market by storm. Then, around a year later, Alder Lake comes out, and it wins. And it does win by a decent amount in single threading. But it doesn't always win in multi-threading, and it does on average, but it's not every single time. And therefore, AMD isn't looked to be that bad. And then consider, like, AMD could really push things with X3D options, 3 nanometer Zen 5C options. I don't think AMD's in a bad position. Then when we move to the next year, I know Intel says it should be at the end of Q4, but I am told that it will probably launch closer to early 2025. Lunar Lake should come out, also using TSMC N3B, and this should go up to 4 big cores, 4 little cores, and 2 efficiency cores. Now, an earlier leak of mine mentioned Lion Cove Plus as the architecture. I was told this week that was the 20A variant, and none of the TSMC variants called it Lion Cove Plus, so I'm just saying it's standard Lion Cove, and it actually should be thought of as a spiritual successor to Lakefield or Tiger Lake U. It's meant as a premium offering in 7 to 15 watt form factors, and it uses a new tile configuration to drive power consumption down hard. So what does that mean? It's not going to be like as weak as Lakefield was, which just had 1 big core and 4 little cores compared to the other stuff on desktop at the time. But it is distinctly going to be not a full mobile lineup, 7 to 15 watts, and really trying to win in that arena. And I am told today that the leaks circulating about higher core count Lunar Lakes, that is just a reporting error. And in fact, if you even look at those leaks, there seems to be indications that it is reporting 4+4, which I believe this channel exclusively leaked months ago. So again, I have not heard of any higher core count increases. If they had that coming, then I don't think they would be doing an Arrow Lake refresh. Unfortunately, around 1 year after the initial Arrow Lake comes out. Now, previous reporting from this channel talked about the Arrow Lake 8+32 core model as being something that would hopefully be part of the initial Arrow Lake generation, but just launch a few months after the other models came out. It's not what it sounds like to me anymore. It sounds like it's coming out around a year afterwards, and this is just a new generation, which is to say single-digit performance gains over Arrow Lake Gen 1 and a 30 to 50% multi-threading increase because they're adding so many more little cores. But it's not a fundamental new architecture. And if you will notice here, that means that it's going to be launching next to Zen 6. AMD is launching Zen 5 less than half a year from now. Then at least half a year after that, Arrow Lake with just up to 24 cores comes out. And then a year later, they have the full Arrow Lake coming, but that's when AMD's launching Zen 6. And so again, I don't think AMD is in a bad situation here. And I even wonder, because if you think about it, 8 big and 32 little cores of Arrow Lake, because there's no hyper-threading, that's 40 threads total. If AMD launches an 8 Zen 5 X3D plus 16 Zen 5C core model, that would in total be, well, think about it, that's 16 plus 32, 48 threads. AMD would actually have a thread advantage over Intel, especially if they launched it before the first Arrow Lake came out for years. And then there's Panther Lake on Intel 18A. I am told this is following on the Arrow Lake refresh launch in a very similar way to how Meteor Lake is following the Raptor refresh launch that's coming out this year. So goes up to 4 big cores, 8 little cores, and 4 low power cores. And it utilizes a new tile layout that Nova Lake is also going to use, and it's going to focus on laptop like Meteor Lake did. So this is what's changing here. Years ago, I had heard about a full Panther Lake launch that was on desktop, high-performance laptop, and low power. Now it seems like it has been entirely redefined as not that at all. And unfortunately, I'm also hearing that the Cougar Cove P-cores, so the big cores in Panther Lake, I'm told they're called Cougar Cove as of now. They are on documentations, and I've seen some of them. They don't list rentable units, and in fact, final definition of this microarchitecture sounds like an enhanced version of Lion Cove Plus. I think there's just no way around it. Panther Lake compared to Arrow Lake is very analogous to Meteor Lake compared to Raptor Lake. It's not really going to up performance much, it's just going to up efficiency, but it's also going to bring the new tile layout that Intel can then slot new Nova Lake tiles into once it's ready. Although, here's the good news. Diamond Rapids, which will be built on Intel 18A, I'm told that it's been redefined to use some sort of a variant of Panther and Cougar Cove that does have rentable units when it launches in 2026. The fact is, I'm not going to double down on the code name for the P-cores on this one because it's so far out that I'm not sure it's really been decided yet. And I think this is one of those architectures, one that's around 3 years away that probably is finalizing what its microarchitecture will be right now. And I see aspects of some documents that kind of throw around code names back and forth. And so all I can say is, Panther Lake doesn't sound like a big deal to me. It sounds like, just like Meteor Lake, it's laying out the new tile organization and driving for super low power consumption. And then Diamond Rapids is coming and actually bringing Royal Core architecture to server before Nova Lake comes out and does the same for consumers. Now, this one is coming in the second half of 2026, I am told, and it will use either TSMC N2P and Intel 16 or 14A. It depends whatever Intel calls this node. I think they're going to call the smaller than 18A node, actually. I think they'll go with like 14A, but it's up to Intel what they call it. But they could also use TSMC N2P. It all really depends on if over the next year, Intel feels like they don't need to go to TSMC anymore for high volume products. But it doesn't sound like that decision's been made yet. But for now, remember, this is in the distant future, but for now, Nova Lake is planning to use 16 big cores, 32 little cores, and 4 low-power little cores. And actually, I'm told those E-cores are called Arctic Wolf cores. Now, I'm not going to refrain from doubling down on whether it uses Cougar Cove, Beast Cove, or some other cove, because there's so many frickin' coves I've seen recently on documentation that contradict each other that I just don't think it's been decided yet. I don't. That is my interpretation here, and I've seen enough Intel architectures get redefinitions a couple years before they come out that I feel like I'm wise enough now to not double down on stuff that's far away. It just doesn't seem to work the same way AMD does. I'm just being honest. AMD seems to stick to an exact architecture name. If they have several designs, one is chosen, that thing gets it. But that doesn't seem to be really how it works at Intel for whatever reason. And I'm seeing that they want to be competitive with Zen 7 with a 20 to 40% single-threaded performance gain over Arrow Lake. And their stated goal actually really is that they want at least a 60% single-threading performance gain over Raptor Lake, which 60% over Raptor Lake sounds insane. But keep in mind, this thing is, well, it's at least 3 years away. So that's 2 generations. That's not that crazy to suggest. And I do want to say that there are also variants of the top i9 and i7 configs that come with 180, or 144 megabytes of last level cache. This is not adamantine. This is its own thing, but they're standard configs as well. So Intel is definitely playing around with stacking core tiles on top of massive levels of cache, just like I'm hearing Zen 6 is likely to do. But, I gotta say, Nova Lake references Zen 7 as competition. I wouldn't take that to mean that they're sure there even is a Zen 7, or what comes after Zen 6 will be called Zen 7. But I would take that to mean that Intel does not think Nova Lake will be launching in time to compete with Zen 6. And so I think everyone just needs to notice that Lunar Lake and Panther Lake have been redefined as distinct laptop generations. And thus Arrow Lake, and then an Arrow Lake refresh, and then Nova Lake are the performance generations that enthusiasts should be waiting for. But then think about it. That means that Intel isn't bringing rentable units to compete with AMD Zen 6 until possibly a year after Zen 6 is out, and they just basically have Arrow Lake performance against all of these Zen 5 variants that AMD can choose to launch for years to come. And because of that, I actually do not think AMD is doomed when it comes to competing against these very impressive on paper Intel architectures coming out over the next few years. I mean, look, yes, Arrow Lake could beat Zen 5 standard in single threading and probably in most games, but can it beat a Vcache Zen 5 product that goes up to 24 cores? I don't know, maybe still in single threading and non-cache dependent benchmarks, but I doubt in all workloads. And I do think AMD could keep the lead in multi-threading in that scenario, maybe even against the refresh of Arrow Lake 2, which even when it goes up to 40 cores, will have less threads than a 24-core Zen 5 product that doesn't use E-cores. It uses all P-cores, and then just a year after Arrow Lake's out, AMD's actually going to be competing with Zen 6 anyway, so we really probably shouldn't be comparing Arrow Lake refresh to Zen 5. We should be comparing that to Zen 6. And while Lunar Lake and Panther Lake look interesting, they're not signaling to me that Intel's really bringing out this super Royal Core moonshot architecture anytime soon before Zen 7, and it's too soon to say what Zen 7 is, but I can bet you it's not going to be weak. So, I don't know. To me, it feels like Intel is consistently kind of launching their architectures over the next few years, while possibly being stronger than AMD. They seem like they're going to be about a generation behind. They're stronger, but they're a generation behind. Kind of like what we're seeing right now with Meteor Lake launching at the tail end of Phoenix, indirectly competing with Strix. That means that if AMD is aggressive over the next 2 years with Zen 5 and Zen 6 before Intel can get Nova Lake out. And by the way, don't forget that Arrow Lake is launching on a new expensive platform, whereas AMD now has cheap AM5 options and DDR5 isn't expensive. I don't know, if AMD is super aggressive with Zen 5, I think they could really do some damage and then follow up with more damage with Zen 6. And then by the time Nova Lake's coming out, I don't know. That's what would worry me if I was Intel. Can we weather the storm? And at a minimum, I think I should just say that I think both companies are going to have powerful architectures coming back and forth every year. And I do not prescribe to any of the channels or commentators out there that are saying that either Zen 5 is going to blow Intel out of the water to the point that Intel can't compete with Arrow Lake. I think Arrow Lake will be able to compete, but I also don't think that Intel is going to launch some god architecture that AMD hasn't planned for. Both companies have interesting stuff coming. Who's going to win over the next few years? And it wasn't going to be a one-day showdown. The showdown between Intel and a resurgent AMD that started with the launch of Zen 1, it's going to start, I think, with Zen 5 and be a drawn-out 3-year process where the real test of will is going to be who can launch their products on time, consistently, and for a reasonable price. That's who I think is going to win the final showdown here before AMD and Intel. But before that happens, there's one more thing I need to talk about. It's the showdown in HEDT that's going to develop over the next 6 months. And it's the one between Intel Fishhawk Falls Refresh and AMD Zen 4 Threadripper. Because there's been a lot of rumors circulating recently that the Threadripper Pro Zen 4 launch is coming much sooner than some people might be anticipating. But if I throw this quote on screen here, That's not what I'm hearing. What I'm basically hearing is that AMD is trying to steal the limelight from Raptor Lake Refresh by announcing Zen 4 Threadripper Pro, and that unless you're an OEM like Lenovo, you're probably not going to be able to easily get it and sell it, right? This is about stealing the limelight. This is about when Intel launches some Raptor Lake Refresh generation that's only like 10% better than its predecessor, AMD wants to announce a new generation that's wildly more than 10% better than the previous gen, and also make anyone waiting for the Fishhawk Falls refresh go, I should just wait for Zen 4 Threadripper. But what I'm at least told, as of this week, is that people waiting for it will possibly be waiting for months still, unless they're, again, someone like Lenovo. And because of that, I gotta say that I actually think Intel has a bit of an opening here. If I throw on screen what I'm hearing about the Fishhawk Falls refresh, I'm being told that it should drop power consumption by double digits, fix the amperage spikes, and simultaneously raise performance. And they're even pulling up the launch to December so that they can hopefully, even if AMD announces it first, they can hopefully have something on the market and do it yourself before AMD does. And look, Sapphire Rapids Workstation's performance is awesome. That's not really the issue. The issue is it just feels like a half-baked, half-ready generation. So if Intel just put that in the oven a little longer, so its amperage spikes and power consumption don't turn your house into an oven, I think that could work out kind of well if it's easier to get before Zen 4 Threadripper is. Most workstations don't need 96 cores. So if Intel launches something that's, say, 10% better with 10% lower power and less power consumption problems, power supply problems, well then, yeah, I don't know. I think that might make a lot of people happy, and I think it's a perfect illustration of how the winner of this upcoming few years of launches is gonna be the person that's more aggressive and does things on time. And I actually think that AMD needs a kick in the ass on HEDT because Zen 4 Threadripper Pro came out way too late. And I think they need to learn a lesson here so that they don't do it again, which will benefit us consumers, but also so they learn that if you launch your products a year behind, well, Intel's year behind products are actually pretty dang good. And yeah, look, let's sum it all up then. I think Zen 5, Arrow Lake, and Zen 6, and Nova Lake will all be impressive products from both of these companies. But the real winner of the next few years, it's going to be the one that launches their products on time and executes the launch well. If AMD shows laziness or indecisiveness, like we saw with Zen 4 and RDNA 3 launches, it could cost them dearly when Intel's firing on all cylinders. They have a chance to bury Intel with Zen 5 and Zen 6 before Intel's rentable unit architectures are ready, but they gotta go for the kill. And Intel cannot afford to let Arrow Lake do any worse than Alder Lake did, nor for Panther Lake and Nova Lake to end up as behind as Meteor Lake did. And yeah, that is going to decide who wins the next few years. Is Intel going to launch products in a similar fashion to how they launched Meteor Lake? And is AMD going to launch products like how they launched RDNA 3? I guess we'll have to wait and see. All right, and that is going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And you did hear me correctly a bit ago. I'm going on vacation in a couple of days. But before I'm going on vacation, I'm putting out this giant video because I thought I had to. And I'm also recording a broken silicon that will come out early. And there's also a fun die shrink coming out that's basically a broken silicon as well. And that's because I feel like this community deserves the content while I'm out. I don't want to leave you hanging, and so I hope you appreciate it. If you do, please subscribe to the Moore's Law Said YouTube channel. Please ring the bell button so you don't miss that upcoming content that's coming out while I'm on vacation. And if you want to support this channel that works like 2 16-hour work days in a row, or really 3 in a row before they go on vacation, consider supporting us on Patreon to get access to those exclusive Die Shrink podcasts in videos. And it's just $2 a month, and it really helps support the channel a lot. And there's higher tiers for more content as well. We cannot do this at Moore's Law is Dead unless we get your support for the hard work. So please consider it if you have that extra money. But either way, thank you for watching.